Dear participants, welcome to the 7th week and 4th module of our course. In the previous module, we have seen how the print media has revolutionized the Western culture particularly. We have seen how the developments owing to the medium of print have been associated both with humanism as well as the ideals of enlightenment. It also resulted in a basic shift from a feudalistic society to a society which was based on industrial capitalism. The printing press and the resultant print culture, as well as the related development of capitalism, also gradually led to industrial revolution, which changed the face of humanities on a permanent footing. In the 18th century, we find that there has been a decline of the aristocracy, as well as it was associated with a rising of the literacy rate. There was a rise in the trade and commerce. The world view was becoming more and more adventurous. So, in this climate, it was the medium of the print, the development of the print media and related technology, which resulted into various social and economic developments and changes. There was also a shift from the collectivity of the experience to the private experience, which resulted into a growing emphasis on individualism, which ultimately resulted into the onset of a modernist and rational temperament in the beginning of the 20th century. A literary critic, Ian Watt, has also linked the development of the print technology with the rise of the novel as a literary genre. The affordability of the books, the cheaper rates at which they were available, fueled a cultural and social change, and people in general moved from religious dependence to a rational argument towards their life. It resulted into a Renaissance period, a Renaissance awakening towards the sciences, and it also resulted into a democratization of intellectual assets. However, the development of the technology was not limited only to the medium of print. We find that the Western techno power and its consequences, which resulted into the print medium and later on developed into other mediums like the cinema, the radio, as well as the internet, they offered new ways of perceiving the world and of understanding one's own self. So, let us say that in the subsequent discussions, we would focus on how the gradually developing new technologies and the technological forms which was afforded to media and information have radically transformed the social and cultural experiences of human beings in various parts of the globe, and it has also changed the nature of reality as it is perceived during the mid and the later parts of the 20th century. The media on which we can focus immediately after the print revolution is the medium of the radio. Even though the early uses of this technology were limited during the warfare, we find that it was during the time of the First World War that it was basically being used for communications between the armed and the naval forces. It was also used for transmitting diplomatic messages sometimes. However, in Europe and America, it was only around 1920s that the feasibility of radio communication and broadcasting became an everyday affair. Before the advent of television, where the moving picture and sound were combined for the first time, the broadcasts of commercial radio became very popular among the masses. These broadcasts were limited not only to the news items, but they also included dramas, comedies and many other forms of entertainment as well as music. The era between the 1920s and 1950s is known as the golden period of radio, because it was during this time that it did not have to compete with any other form of media. It also became much more influential than the newspaper, and even though the popularity of newspaper, the print medium did not abate as such during this era, we find that radio immediately became popular among the masses. One of the reasons was the immediacy with which the messages could be communicated to the people, and also even the people who were not literate could depend on the medium of radio to find out certain changes as well as for certain forms of entertainment. It also became gradually a medium to pass on certain messages to abet social and political unity and coherence, especially in times of national crisis such as war or national disasters, etc. They had the ability to unite different classes and sections of the people and also allow them the illusion of belonging to a nation much more effectively in comparison to the newspapers, because of the voice tones which could be used and the immediacy with which the message could be received by the people. It had a significant role in almost all the 20th century revolutions and major movements. In the beginning of the 20th century, as we would discuss later on in much more detail, they were a significant part of all the revolutionary attempts, whether it was in Soviet Russia, in China, or in India when we were fighting against the colonial rules. So, the print medium as well as the medium of clandestine radio had a very effective and significant role to play in all these mass mediums in the beginning of the 20th century. Among other things, we find that the market forces came to be associated with this form of media. We can say that it pioneered the evolution of consumerism through mass marketing, and before 1941 almost 2/3 of radio shows depended on advertising for financing themselves. It also had a huge impact on the development and preservation of popular masses and the way the consumption of music by the masses changed in the society. Popular music, which was limited to isolated segments before radio became a popular medium of transmission, it gained national importance. There were live music performances and their broadcast over radio became a staple. It is during this heyday of radio that jazz and country music flourished and very soon became a part of the mass culture. Though radio used to broadcast the classical music also, we find that it also promoted the regional music and the folk arts in a big way. So, the juxtaposition of classical and regional music created new perspectives about the high and low culture, and these understandings were also promoted and shaped by the contemporary radio culture. These music transmissions and broadcast of the live performance also changed how people viewed entertainment, as well as dance and music were performed in different social settings. Radio broadcasters enabled innovations in song arrangements and experimentations, and rapid changes in music were introduced to keep a pace with the changing taste of the audience. It is during this time that we find that several radio artists gained almost a celebrity status and stardom. Some of these names include Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, and Johnny Cash. The revolution of radio picked up at a later date in developing nations. Many of us would still remember the voice of Amin Sayani being broadcast a particular program over the Vivid Bharati of All India Radio. It also had an impact on the political landscape. It bolstered support for political leaders, different ideologies, and people depended on radio to connect with the masses. Some of the interesting connections which the political leadership tries to establish with the people can be hinted at here. In the history of radio broadcast, people remember Roosevelt's fireside chats during the Depression era in the US society to explain the rationale and effectiveness of his government policies. Hitler's speeches during the Nazi rule to bolster the courage of his army and to bolster the morale of his people also became very popular. In India, all of us remember the speech of Jawaharlal Nehru, our first Prime Minister, which started with this phrase of a tryst with destiny. We can also refer to Prime Minister Modi's Man Ki Baat as very effective ways to have a direct connect with the people through the medium of radio. So, we find that radio soon became a socio-cultural force and also a force to propagate a political ideology. Because of its massive and immediate connection with the masses, it also became to be used as a successful tool for war propaganda, and particularly during the Second World War time, we find that it was used for certain purposes. Radio propaganda was used to manufacture fear and hatred through the creation of bias and misinformation, also to promote in the Nazi Germany a feeling of anti-Semitism. In the US, particularly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, radio was used to create a propaganda and a climate of mistrust and hatred against the Japanese. It also was used to support the war efforts to create a feeling of nationalism and also to abet the sales of the war bonds. It also played a very important role in the formation of public opinion. Many of us would remember during the days of 1965 Indo-Pak War, a particular program which was broadcast on All India Radio by Devki Nandan Pandey. The title of this program was Radio Jhutistan, and it had become immensely popular among the masses during those times and helped people form a particular public opinion about the successful efforts of the government of India. So, we find that it becomes a powerful medium for creating public opinion as well as for creating a particular climate to support political careers as well as political ideologies. Owing to the impact of technology, the face of radio technology was also changing. One of the major forces which acted in favor of this particular media was its portability and the simplicity of usage, and therefore it became open to immense possibilities. And gradually we find that with satellite and HD radio, there was a continuous expansion of its reach as well as a continuous addition to the kinds of programming because of the availability of new technologies. On satellite radio, the censorship was automatically less, and therefore it resulted into the formation of outlets for broadcasting immensely controversial subject matter also, which resulted into a certain shock value in order to draw the listeners. So, in HD radio, we find that freedom to broadcast less commercial programs, absence of subscription fee, etc., as well as later on the internet radio expanded the accessibility of the radio, made it more innovative, and it made it possible for the radio programmers to offer different kinds of programs. Another major medium which had the capability to change the way we perceive and understand culture was the television. It reflected and nurtured cultural values, attitudes and modes in the beginning, and very soon it also developed into a force which could change the way culture is projected and our cultural values are formed. We can say that like various other mediums, the relationship between the television and society is reciprocal. It does have a power to sway viewers through subtle commentary or more direct commentary on the representations of certain behavior, identities and modes of being. And by this subtle portrayal and subtle commentary, it can create a particular type of a mood among the audience. It sometimes offers a mirror to the society, and at the same time it also creates content which can shape the cultural values and understanding of certain issues among the viewers. If we look at the development of the TV culture through the decades, we find that there is a reflection of the contemporary cultural moods. During the decade of 1950s, when TV was coming into existence, we find that major networks offered programs like sitcoms and family dramas, which portrayed an idealized vision of suburban domestic American life. That was a life which had the maximum salability, as various gender critics also tell us. And so the programs like Leave It to Beaver, The Donna Reed Show, etc., became immensely popular among the American people. These programs portrayed conservative middle class values. They upheld the significance of traditional family systems, also highlighted the significance and pertinence of maintaining traditional patriarchal gender roles in the society. At the same time, while they were focusing on traditional values in many ways, they also sidestepped more controversial contemporary issues like racial discrimination or the civil rights movements or movements for gender equality. Television was of course much more significant and effective in comparison to radio, because it also could create a visual impact, and at the same time it also could present a video coverage of various significant contemporary events. In the decade of 1960s, we find that the color broadcast becomes gradually more popular and widespread, and TV news broadcast also started to vividly portray various contemporary world events. Some of the events, the portrayal of which became very popular on the TV screen, unfortunately, was Kennedy's assassination and funeral, the atrocities which were committed upon children, women, and even on entire villages during the Vietnam War, etc., the destructive effects of the atom bombs on Japan. These were certain events which were portrayed in detail on contemporary TV screen, and they generated anti-war sentiments amongst the US citizens and created awareness about the evil influences of the war. At the same time, we find that there was also a simultaneous popularity of those programs which were escapist in nature, those sitcoms which had to deal with the political unrest and could suggest an escapist route easily. The dichotomy of harsh news versus the escapist tendencies of prime time network shows reminds us of Adorno's criticism of culture industry, which we have taken up in detail in one of the other modules. During the era of 1970s, we find that the political activism, the protest, the changing social perspectives on the issues like civil rights, the students movement, the feminist activism, etc., were reflected in the news coverage as well as in the programs of TV. They also started to take up various issues which were reflecting the changing cultural norms. For example, issues like single parenthood, the need for abortion, women's rights to have a divorce, etc., as well as non-nuclear families. So, these were the issues which had drawn the attention of the contemporary masses, and these were also being covered in the decade of 1970s TV serial through the news channels as well as through various prime time shows. During the 1980s, we find that the era of cable TV is introduced. There was an influx of various channels related with news or entertainment, etc., and this stiff competition led to a greater variety as well as an openness to deal with those issues which were up till now considered unacceptable and provocative. So, these issues were fiercely debated on these new channels, and at the same time the popularity also increased because there was often a violent portrayal of adult content. And therefore, we find that in the decade of 1980s, renewed debates on to what extent the media has to take care of the societal morality, to what extent the adult content has to be depicted on the screen, etc., gained a new perspective and significance. It is around 2000 when we enter the 21st century that we find that the television has attained a true global reach, because now it can access almost every part of the globe, and now it has also started to act as a major cultural force. It is during these decades that we have stiff competitions between the cable and the satellite televisions, and it is during this time we find that networks become more specialized and channels are being devoted to a specific depiction of a particular theme, for example music or cookery or the sports or fashion, etc. Use of satellites was started for broadcasting in late 1970s, and the issues were expensive satellite dish as well as issues related with piracy. The satellite providers tried to target the rich as well as the poor consumers through the direct TV and through the dish network. The cable TV was threatened around 1990s after satellite companies were allowed to broadcast local channels. The satellite TV resulted into more premium channels, attractive prices and better packages of movies and entertainment channels. So, we find that gradually TV is becoming more and more specialized medium to live up to the demands of an audience, which is also becoming more and more fragmented owing to various other changes in contemporary cultural scenario. We find that in today's TV content, the presence of controversial and provocative element is very much there. It can have simultaneously a liberating as well as a frightening impact. We find that there is a representation of provocative content as well as a representation of those issues which were up till now sidestepped by various media houses. For examples, issues related with sexual minorities, ethnicity issues, the issues related with a single woman, etc. So, these issues and their depiction in various ways can change public opinion and create a particular mindset among the people. And therefore, it is said that the depiction of these controversial and provocative issues can be both liberating and frightening simultaneously. The emergence of partisan news channels to cater to the political leanings of the audience is also a major issue. It also is related with our concern over the absence of neutrality or objectivity in the representation of news, which were up till now considered to be a major asset of media, particularly during the times of the print media. So, we find that TV is becoming increasingly immersed in certain ideological positions due to the polarization of TV news, and there are definitely certain ramifications of such media bias. Various intellectual theories have been generated about it. Various approaches have also resulted from this positioning, which we will take up in detail later on. Another change which has started in the content of the TV is the inclusion of reality TV shows, which reflect the power of this medium to influence the mass culture. The emphasis on talent shows, talent hunt shows, which provide instant celebrity status to otherwise normal individuals, is also a major showcase of the significance of this particular medium. We can say that this medium reflects not only the cultural values, but it also simultaneously influences and shapes our culture by giving a particular voice to issues related with masses. We find that after the internet also, TV has been able to retain its significance to a large extent, and it is still a very much popular medium. The advent of internet has revolutionized the way people look at the media, and before that people were only passive viewers of the media, but gradually we find that because of the options afforded by internet, people have a greater control on what to watch, how to watch, when to watch and where to watch, etc. So, because of the internet we find that various online streaming platforms have become possible, and these online streaming platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime Time, Hulu, etc. threaten the traditional networking broadcasting. Because of the internet and its accessibility among the people, there is a growing emphasis of the market forces over the way consumerism is being molded. The freedom to watch entire episodes on demand, etc., is only one part of it, but we find that advertising has gained a newer dimension during the days of internet. Because of the impact of internet, we find that TV has also become more interactive. It has combined traditional content which it used to show with online content and has incorporated features like weather updates, news stories, etc. There are also attempts to combine TV with social networking sites. For example, people can be given an opportunity to discuss the show while it is being streamed on online forums in real time. Another aspect of medium which we would like to discuss is the medium of films. This is the first audiovisual form of mass media because it had been initiated into our culture much before the television became a household item. It has an immense power to capture the imagination of the people as well as to have an emotional connect with the spectator. The films started to capture the imagination of the people around a time when capitalism was also reaching its peak, and like TV we find that films were influenced by the contemporary culture and also influenced it to a large extent. It also reflects the dominant cultural attitudes, beliefs and modes of its own times. For example, Griffith's Birth of Nation, the movie which came out in 1915, it was set during the American Civil War, reflected the racist tendencies prevalent in the American society. The medium of films, like radio, was also used extensively for propaganda purposes during the Second World War. Films hold hegemony over public domain, and there were special screenings for the soldiers as well as for the general public to abate a particular type of sentiment among them. The films which were being produced in Hollywood during the war years echoed pro-war sentiments to generate a feeling of patriotism and nationalism among the people. The themes focused on the representation of sacrifice, contribution to the war, heroic portrayals of soldiers in various situations, and they also demonized the Axis powers. At the same time, the films which were being produced in Germany, which were financed by the Nazi party, portrayed their perspective, and they also portrayed an anti-Jew sentiments in their movies. One of the movies which we can still refer to is The Eternal Jew. These films were technically rich, but the content was dominated by the dominant sentiment of the contemporary nation. The production code in Hollywood diminished the freedom of filmmakers as well as of producers. It was a form of self-imposed censorship in the disguise of regulation of film content. We can also say that the trajectory of films is analogous to TV. It reflects dominant views and attitudes, but at the same time it has also started to grow more skeptical, provocative and experimental as time moves. And these points which are listed below towards the bottom of this slide give an indication of these changes. So, we find that like any other medium, the medium of film has also reflected the changing modes of the society. During the 1980s, we find that films depicted the height of a consumerist society. It became a part of the mass culture and everyday culture, And we find that during this time there was a renewed interest in the stardom which was established much earlier in the beginning of the 20th century. It is around this time that films and the film world started to determine the sense of fashion of the people, the tastes as well as the attitudes of the people. So, we can say that it has a significant power to shape the way people perceive various cultural trends. It is after the 1990s that we find a major shift in the portrayal of the content in majority of the films. Though many of them still conform to the social modes, we find that simultaneously there was a trend to depict challenging social attitudes, particularly focused on issues on sex, race, gender and identity formation. At the same time, we find that there is an advent of independent movies and documentary films, and which also include new queer cinema, the criticism of contemporary politics and dominant culture. The impact of technology on films can also be seen, as the media has changed its shape continually owing to new technological advancements. The technological advancement impacts films in different ways. It also influences the way in which a film is produced, changing the economic aspect and economic investments in a movie. Changing technology also shapes the way a film is to be produced and viewed, and at the same time it is to be distributed and consumed, and how it is to be marketed. So, we find that the relationship between technology and medium is very intricate, and we cannot dissociate the two, and at the same time the relationship between medium and technology is also very intense. We find that it is during the 1970s that VCR was introduced, and a movie could be viewed at home easily. It was initially expensive, but very soon it became a very affordable thing, and there were retail rental store businesses, and box office release was no longer the only source of income. The DVD technology came around the late 1990s, and it further threatened the cinema owners. The advent of digital films and the use of digital technology in terms of cinematography and CGI technology also introduced major changes in which the films could be produced and films could be consumed by the viewers in different settings. With the advent of the internet technology, we find that streaming platforms have also offered a minimal subscription fee to a wide array of films, and they have also started financing films which are very much different in content and its portrayal, and it is a new trend which has been started by these platforms. The YouTube user generated content also opened up new avenues for independent filmmakers, for collaborative projects and for films which are crowdsourced. So, thus we can say that because of the advent of new technologies, the market has expanded to give continually fresh opportunities to new players and experimental cinema makers. The changing modes of technology have also made it possible to have a certain exposure to world cinema and cinema which is known as non-mainstream, because earlier when the internet was not there, we find that the market release was dependent on various economic factors. There could be a lack of distributors, there could be budget constraints, and there could be concerns about the market viability. So, we find that because of technology, viewers can have more and more exposure to new type of cinema from all around the globe. The internet and social media has displaced the hegemony of traditional media forms. We find that now the transmission of culture and culture related representations has become multidirectional. It is no longer limited in the hands of corporations, and the participation of audience has become much more significant, because every user now can also create and upload a particular content. It also has positive as well as negative connotations, which we will be discussing later on. In today's world, we find that internet has changed the focus of the social media, and it has also changed the way culture is perceived and consumed by the people. But still we find that customization and specialization are the key words behind all these media progress. That means that there has to be something for everyone. The popularization of the internet has led to innovations and adaptability. So, we find that the older ways of media as we used to understand it in the beginning of the 20th century is also trying to adapt to these technical innovations. So, we find that most of the print newspapers and magazines have also converted to an online presence. So, the news TV channels also have online versions and presence, allowing the users to access them on desktop, smartphones and tablets. The screen is also becoming more and more portable as the technology is advancing. So, therefore, we find that media is becoming a much more significant force to shape our culture today in comparison to what it was about 100 years back. So, there is a new culture now, and in which everybody can participate through blog writings, and this has given a particular sense of freedom to the users. We can also say that it is a democratization at an altogether different level. So, the discussion forums on the social media and the threads built around various topics create a particular sense of participation in the contemporary world. To sum up, we can say that we are living in a culture in which there is a quicksand of changes. The media is continually changing its shape, and therefore, we find that culture is also bound to change its shape. New technology changes media. There are growing concerns also over the lack of privacy, the theft and consequential misuse of user information, and these allegations are being made against corporations because they can leak private data for seeking profit. At the same time, we find that the extensive use of cookies to track consumer preferences to have targeted marketing is also an area of concern for many of the policy makers. There are growing possibilities of abuse in order to create a dangerous sway to the public opinion, as we are witnessing in various contemporary events. Let us say that technology and media together is a force which can threaten the very core of individuality as we used to understand it till now. It makes us rethink of how culture is to be interpreted in today's context, and also to wonder whether there are any values and cultural interpretations which are perennial. In critical thought, we find that there has always been an attempt to keep pace with the changing dimensions of culture, with the changing ways of interpretations to which this term is open to. It is one of the most debatable words in contemporary vocabulary, and we find that it is very difficult to define it. Still, in the next module, we would try to discuss the way our interpretations of the word culture have grown and changed. Thank you.